Hi, Kristin. How are you?
I'm wonderful. How are you?
I'm good. I will say I have been looking forward to this talk since we booked you, Kristin. We've taken a minute to finally get this woman in our podcast lineup. And we're just so grateful that you're joining us today. Thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me, especially on this important topic. So
Oh
I've
my
been looking
goodness.
forward to it as well.
Yes. Oh my gosh. This topic, sleepovers, is a big one. Especially right now, I think in today's culture, there's just so many feelings and opinions about this. So I cannot wait to chit chat about it with you today. But today, before we get into this whole topic, Kristin, we'd love to learn more about you. Like, please tell us about yourself and your background and how you ended up where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm originally from the San Francisco Bay Area. Ended up in Salt Lake City, Utah about 16, 17 years ago. And so I call Utah home now. And I love it. It's a great place to raise a family. We have 6 kids.
Oh my God,
Which
how you do that, I don't know. That's amazing.
don't know. I'm like waiting for this like midlife crisis breakdown that I just like I am certain to have and should have with 6 kids. And actually what's so funny about having 6 kids is I get Christmas cards. So I'm a member of like I'm a Mormon. And so I'll get Christmas cards. So I have a lot of friends with a lot of kids. Catholics, Mormons, we have a lot of kids. And so I'll get a Christmas card. I'm like, oh my gosh, this family has so many kids. That is so weird. Why would someone have? And then I'm like, oh, wait, they have 6. And so do I. So I think it's weird when people have so many kids. But how it happened was we had one girl and then 2 and then 3. And then, I was in that Instagram era of like, what are we going to have? And on number 4, it was another girl. So
Oh
we
my
had
God.
4 girls 2 years apart. And I was kind of like, and I just couldn't push past the feeling of like, well, maybe we try one more time. I didn't honestly really want to. And then I remember actually taking the pregnancy test and putting it, my husband was working, like put it on the table and I'm like, I'm pregnant and walked by. Well, to make a long story short, we ended up with surprise identical twin boys. So
Oh my God.
4 girls, we ended up in this crazy space of twins. It's not in our family. Identical twins are a freak of nature, and they are that. They are like the best part of our family. I'm so grateful that I just couldn't push past that, like we were done. So, anyways, we have 6 kids. I get a ton of help. It takes a village. I'm like an 80% is good enough. I'm never looking for perfection, and I'm a pretty hands-off mom. Like, I have a video of one of my sons at 2, like, he's like saying, get the chicken, like getting chicken nuggets out of the freezer, putting in the microwave. He was 2. I'm like, I actually think I'm doing something right here as a mom. So we have a lot of fun, get a lot of help. I travel a lot. I take care of myself. I exercise. I'm out of the home. I'm like, I guess you could say I'm a stay-at-home mom because I don't have a paid job, but I spend from the time I drop my kids off at 8 o'clock until about 3:30 when I pick them all up. Now that they're all in school, I spend my day out in the community giving back, working with nonprofits, working on policy efforts across the state of Utah, really trying to fill gaps that I see. I'm a convener, I'm a gatherer. I love to host and entertain, and then we run Traeger Grills, which I don't know if you've heard of this in Houston, but it's a wood pellet grill company. So that's our business, and takes a lot of time of my husband, and I'm a wife, and I always say like I'm a fun wife. I think I'm an easy to be married to woman. I don't require a lot, and I always see the best in him and know that he's trying to do his best. And so we have a really good marriage that we work on constantly. But I also don't take anything too seriously, and just love. I love my life. I love giving back. I love trying to help, and so that's where I ended up in the great sleepover debate. Um,
Yes.
been working on policy for the last couple of years in the state of Utah, different policies, period. Poverty, teen center, teen homeless resource centers. And then this last year got really, really involved in a statewide solution for child sexual abuse prevention education in our
Wow.
K-6 grades. And really, as I would say neck deep in this issue, but really it was like drowning in this issue, this prevalence of this child sexual abuse. You realize that like my parents, I was kind of allowed to do sleepovers. My husband was not. So our rule with our 6 kids is kind of like no sleepovers. But I think when we started thinking of no sleepovers, it was like we don't want our kids out drinking and driving around late at night. You kind of, but as I understood the prevalence of child sexual abuse, not only between adults and kids, but kid on kid, and a lot of this happening at sleepovers, the reason I didn't want my kids at sleepovers actually changed.
Really? Tell us about that.
So when you're going around the state, what's really neat about, for instance, my state in Utah, which is different from Texas, is that we have 3.5 million people. I know our legislature here in Utah, so I can sit down with them and say, this with my group with the policy project, and we can sit down and have a conversation. Say this is a prevalent problem as we're looking at teen homelessness, as we're looking at intergenerational poverty, as we're looking at a lot of these suicide rates. I mean, incarceration, you name it. One of these issues that's underlying all of them is this child sexual abuse that's happened in their life. Um, and so, as we were out literally touring the state, talking about this, educating parents, I remember the first one I was at, there was 800 high school students in this big auditorium. And I had a line after we talked about this, I had a line of students there talking to me about what had happened to them. And the stories are heart-wrenching and heartbreaking, and
Mm.
they're real, and they're happening in your neighborhood, right? Like that's the difference, is like this knows no socioeconomic level or race or religion. It's happening everywhere to all of our kids, whether we want to admit it or not. And so the reality truly brought me to my knees of like, we need to do something about this. So the statewide policy that the policy project worked on was this prevention education in kindergarten. So starting really, really early, through 6th grade. And we have it, but not a lot of kids were getting it. And so we realized that as we are hearing these stories, and once you start talking about this, it's incredible the people that come up and divulge and tell you what's happened to them. And the amount of accounts of what I heard that happened at a sleepover situation was astronomical. It felt like so much higher. Now, by the way, that's cousin sleepovers, that's uncles, that's the one of the worst stories was like my dad was a dentist and he had his dentist friends over and a guy came in my room. Like, I mean, like a horrible in your home. It's not the man in the white van that I think probably you and I were kind of like taught to be worried about. It's people that you know and love and trust. And that was just this overriding theme consistently of someone I knew, someone I trusted, someone I was, my grandpa's basement. Like I can't tell you the amount of cousin situations. And so as we learned about this, we realized we need to talk to our kids at a very, very early age. If this is
Mhm.
happening to these kids, by the way, in kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade, third, you don't even know that it's wrong. You don't know that this isn't happening to everybody else around you. You kind of think that this is normal. So we, to make a long story short, we passed the policy. We got ongoing funding to ensure that every kid in Utah has an opportunity to learn, to report, to have safe adults that they can go to. Research shows us that a kid, and this is just, think about this, a kid has to tell 3 adults before they're believed.
Mm.
So the first one doesn't believe them. The second one doesn't believe them. And finally, hopefully by the third time, they are believed that they are being sexually abused. It's horrific. And as we've talked to nationwide and world renowned experts, we said, this is before, like, what's going to surprise us? What's going to kind of come our way? And he said, you will not believe that everyone keeps the perpetrator safe. Everyone believes a perpetrator. And we have found that again and again and again and again. And so when the ideas of sleepovers come up, one, we don't allow it. If we were to ever do that, there's a big conversation, right? And it's an ongoing, I shouldn't say big conversation, it's an ongoing conversation of if for some reason we end up in another state and we're at grandma's house, these are things that can happen. Kids touch other kids where the bathing suit is. Like you have really direct conversations and say sexual abuse happens between uncles and kids, it happens between grandpas and kids, it happens between dads. So, like the book that we read here in Utah says Kate's dad touches her where the bathing suit is. Like, it's a very direct conversation. Like, we are not going to beat around the bush. And as much
Mhm.
as we think like we're taking away our kids' innocence, I actually think we're keeping our kids safe. And we say, this isn't always going to happen, but it does happen to kids, and it happens to kids that you know. And so this is what we're going to watch out for. If you ever start to feel uncomfortable, you can walk away. If somebody, and by the way, now with phones, right?
Oh
Phones
my
and
god. That's a whole
devices,
other thing.
a
Yes.
whole other thing. But that's part of the conversation is if anybody wanted to take. So you just have these ongoing conversations. And what research shows is when we talk about it to our kids, when we have kids have tools, words, vocabulary, they know that they can say no. They have three trusted adults that they can talk to. It cuts it down in half. Like it
Mhm.
cuts instances down in half. And what's neat about having these conversations, and we'd hate to admit it, but some of our kids are, they don't like to call them perpetrators, but they're kids with sexually deviant behavior. They're playing around, they're experimenting, they're doing a lot of stuff. But when we have these conversations, you're not only keeping your child safe that could be preyed upon, you're keeping your child safe that might be experimenting or doing something. They're not these crazy, terrible kids, right? They're just making bad decisions and poor choices. And if we stop it in time, the recidivism rate of kids becoming perpetrators is actually really low. So that's like a really neat thing that it's like 2%. If kids get help after, perpetrating on another kid, if they get help, 2% of them go on to be, and it's talked about and it's brought out, it's not shame filled. 2% of them go on to actually be perpetrators as adults. So it's real, like we have this incredible opportunity to, I would say, blow open the box and say, we're not going to hide this anymore. We're not going to put shame around this anymore. We're going to say that this happens. It happens in our church, it happens in our neighborhood. And if this were happened to you, come and talk to me and we can deal with it.
Oh my gosh. So that's crazy that you say this. I have a whole bunch of questions that I want to make sure that we get through because I want our listeners to really understand this whole debate. But when you said that, actually, to tell you a story, my son, when he was in preschool, he had 2 little girls. And people are gonna say, "Where was the teacher?" There was only 1 teacher, the other aide was out, there was another kid who had to go to the bathroom, so, one teacher asked the other teachers, "Can you watch my kids while I take this kid to the bathroom while they're outside playing?" There was around the corner, 2 little girls got my son in the corner and told him to pull down his pants and to show his penis. They touched him on. Yes, and then another teacher who wasn't even, like, supposed to be watching found them, and, of course, everyone blames the boy. Like, "What are you doing? What is going on? Like, what are you doing to these girls?" And then once they talked to the kids, they found out that the girls actually told him to do that, and he was so embarrassed. He was like, I just was doing what I was told." They were, by the way, they were 4 years old. All of the 3 of them, 4 years old. And I was crying and bawling, and they didn't even know that he was touched until I found out. He came home and told me, "Mommy, you're gonna be so upset, but they touched me too." And I just broke down and cried and was like, "What the heck?" So, in that situation, Kristin, what do you do? Like, because I still don't feel those parents, we avoid each other. We don't talk to because they think my son probably was the one who did something wrong. But even the teachers told me no, they all fessed up that the girls told him to do this, and he was just trying to, and my son's very much like, I just want everyone to like me, and I'm going to do what I'm, I want to be cool, I want to be funny, I'm going to do. So yeah, what the heck, what would you do in that situation?
Ooh. Yeah, that's a perfect example of my first thought goes now that I've been in this issue so deeply, my first thought
Yeah.
immediately goes to what's happening to the girls.
Yeah.
What's happening to the girls that they would together go behind a corner, ask another little boy to pull down his pants, and to me that is blaring that there is something going on. Now it may not be the case, but I hope the school and the social workers and the parents have asked, like, it doesn't come from nowhere. Some of it is experimenting and things
Hmm.
like that, but I would
Yeah.
first want to understand, like, what's going on with the girls, and are the parents doing a deep dive into what's going on with their girls, and
I don't
is
think
something
so. I think
happening?
that they
Probably
brushed it
not.
off as, oh, this was just really a bad choice. We don't do that, and never talk about it again.
Never talk about it again. That's exactly that shame. So then the
Yes.
girl, it's like very intriguing, right? Because also as a little kid, it's not sexual yet, right? At all.
Right. Yeah.
So then there's this like shame of like, don't talk about it. And then what's really tricky with this kind of stuff too is like kids are like, I want to do it again. And so then the shame starts and then you can't tell and it's more secretive. And the more that you bury it and put shame around it, and all of that, it makes it so much worse. So the girls should be having ongoing conversations, or therapy or whatever that they can afford, to make sure that there's nothing there. And when parents don't want to see it, because in the end they don't want to see it, that's where problems really occur, because then you're also then known as like the little girl who did that to a boy. And when you haven't processed it and worked through it, so I'm concerned about the girls. So in terms of your son, thank goodness he has a mom who is willing to listen and be there. And I think the answer is, I am so happy you told me. Like, sometimes that happens and it's so uncomfortable. And the minute that you felt uncomfortable and you didn't want to, and you, or it happened, and of course it happened, that of course that's what you would do because you didn't know what to do. You came right home and you told me, and I'm here for you. And so if something like this happens again, because you can't think in the day and age that we're in now with cell phones and all that other stuff, that girls aren't going to be asking him for pictures. It's just gonna happen, as my high schooler says, like, oh, everybody's doing it. Horrible. But that, like, you are that safe place, and that he's not weird, he's not bad, he's not dirty because of that. I mean, I talked to a parent the other day, I said it was like my kid that was instigated the whole picture thing. Once again, the more shame that that kid feels, the more that, like, I did something wrong, I'm bad, I did pull down my pants, and walking him through, like, of course you did. Like, you've never, and then next time, and then like really role playing. So let's say on Tuesday, like, you get to school and they're like, come here, and it's different girls, and they're like, pull down your pants. What would you say? He's like, I don't know. You're like, well, what would you say? So maybe you could say, I don't pull down my pants. I don't do that unless I'm going to the bathroom. I'm gonna head back into class. So really role playing with him, because it's really our education that we're working on in schools is just so they can plan ahead. It's like anything in life. If you're not knowing, and your son now sadly knows at an early age that something like this could happen and has happened and potentially could happen again. And he's definitely not alone. And so the more that then you can say, like, hey bud, has anything like happened at school that's made you uncomfortable? That uncomfortable word is really good. And then letting
Hmm.
them kind of in their own time talk about it, talking about it again. Like, we lost one of my twins, they're 7. And so I could tell it like really traumatized him. We left him at a beach in Hawaii. It was horrible, horrible. And it traumatized him. And so in moments where it wasn't high stress, it was like, hey, how are you feeling about that? Are you still feeling anxious about it? And it was an ongoing, it wasn't a one time like, oh, it's over, we're done with
Right.
that.
Right.
It's like this ongoing conversation. And then he gets to first grade. It's like, hey, so remember, if anybody ever wants to touch you or take pictures of you, I mean, now the pictures is like you always have to talk about, you just walk away and you report it. Reporting is really that big part. You wouldn't say reporting to him, but then you come home and tell mom.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my gosh. Thanks for walking us through that. I think even I get embarrassed sharing that story because also I feel like it's not my story to tell, it's his, but at the same time I hope that whoever's listening to this learns that this really does happen anywhere and everywhere to anyone. It doesn't discriminate and we have to protect our children. So, yeah, so let's get back to like you sparked just this conversation on social media about sleepovers. And it's so true. Like, I was born in the 80s and we did sleepovers all the time. It was never a thought like, oh, yeah, we just go over every weekend to a different friend's house. But you talked about, sleepovers and child safety, and you have touched on this. But can you tell us more about like, what is the debate? Like, when people really get down to it, what are people debating?
Yeah, and it's funny because when people first saw that article that you probably saw, some people were like, "I don't understand how this is even a debate. Like, what's the debate?"
Yeah.
And then they
Yeah.
read the comments and they read the article and they're like, "Oh, I see now." And so sadly, it is something that we rethink and maybe that's what it is and I came out really strong on my social media with it and my reel went viral and it was crazy and it really did spark a debate. But I did want to come out strong with it because I do feel like if you're never getting anyone that's like disagreeing with you or that you're getting them to rethink it, I think you're actually missing the boat. So then I think I came back on and tried to do one a little bit softer that said, okay, if you are thinking to yourself, sleepovers are really important to me. And by the way, they are. Like, I have a brother in law who's like, those were my best childhood memories. And thank goodness nothing happened to him, right? But he's like, of course, my kid's going to do sleepovers. Like, that was an integral part of separation from my parents and bonding with cousins or friends and of course there's a lot of good that can happen, right? I think for us as my family, we're balancing risk versus reward, right? And so
Mhm.
is there a greater risk when you put a child in a sleepover situation? Absolutely. So you just have to say, like, I know that I'm putting, and then we're trying to mitigate risk as
Right.
parents. Like in the end, we're not trying to pave a smooth path, but we're trying to kind of mitigate risk where if we're helping them make choices, we kind of help them make the best choices possible. So some parents say like it's exactly what you just guys said. This is never going to happen to my kid. This happens to them. And I don't even know if it really happens. And it didn't happen to me. And I did sleepovers my whole life. And so of course it's not going to happen to my kid. And what you learn as an adult now is so many people it happened to them. They just never said anything. Like, you actually, if you start having this real conversation with everyone every single person has a story. Maybe not to them, but in their family, they have a story and it's
Mhm.
horrific. And so the more you get in it, of course, the more nervous you get. So I did have really good friends who were like, that's great that you don't do them. I still do. I know the family that my kids are going to. I trust them. Um, and sadly, I'd say like I generally don't trust people, especially men, but because with my girls, but I will say it also is this kid on kid. And so when we say like, oh, there's no men going on the boating trip or there's no older brothers going, I've said that as well, thinking I'm totally in the clear. But then you see, of course, the same sex, abuse, which I think 20 years ago we probably wouldn't have really mentioned or talked about, but it absolutely happens. So really, I'm just as a parent trying to mitigate risk. And so we've decided it's not best for us. Some parents say, I know the risk. It's worth taking. I've done my due diligence. I've done my homework. Like, you're making way too big of a deal about this. So on that second reel, when I tried to soften the blow, because I did have a lot of people coming after me, which by the way, I'm online a lot. I'll take it, right? All day long. Is I said, okay, great. Your kids do sleepovers. This is what I would do. So
Mhm.
my kids are going over to their friend's house and I know their mom and I know their dad and they have two sisters. Like, it seems very like no risk at all. So I'd say, hey, to one of my daughters, Kate, we don't do this, but if you were, or even a trip or something like that, like this is something that could happen. It could be the older sister that touches you where your bathing suit is. It could be the older sister that what's tricky and you have to kind of figure out timing and age is like who would maybe want to rub your back. It doesn't always start with an attack. It's not necessarily like this older brother's going to come and attack you. That's not, it's kind of this thing where you're uncomfortable. And so you may be uncomfortable if someone wants to rub your back or touches you, or you're sleeping and you wake up. I mean, I can't even tell you the thousands of stories. You wake up and someone's right on you or next to you. But this could happen. So what would you do? So talking about it and saying, we're taking a risk and there's a chance that something like this could happen. What would you do? Who would you tell? And when they know that they already have a plan, we call it like a safety moment, a safety plan in place, they know that then they can wake up, call, now we have a lot of us have cell phones, and call and say, hey, I need to be picked up. I feel super uncomfortable. And the moment that you're uncomfortable, you leave the situation. Because a lot, the words overused, but this grooming is
Mm,
true, right? Like it's not an attack. It's normally kind of a grooming and an uncomfortable, where had I known, I actually could have gone out of it a lot earlier. I just didn't think that I could. I didn't think that I had the option to leave. I was too embarrassed to try to like not have the sister be rubbing my back, although it was really weird. And so when they know that and they're like, oh, I've been told that this could happen, where a kid that's never talked about it, they're sitting there, someone's rubbing their back and they're just frozen and they don't know what to do. The last thing in the world they want to do is talk to the mom where they're staying. That's super uncomfortable. They don't want to go home and talk to their mom because it's never been talked about. It's never been broached. They would think they did something wrong. They were, laying in a situation or sitting in a situation. So many kids, the world we think revolves around us. And so if something were to happen to us, it's because we did something wrong. So that shame and that stigma and that secrecy really allows these perpetrators to continue it instead of really nipping in the bud. And so what I've learned in this is stopping it after the first time is prevention. If you were to
mm.
stop something either once it got super uncomfortable or once something happened, absolutely is the best prevention possible, because normally these things are not one-time events, right? Sometimes they can
Right.
go on years, sadly. So
Right.
prevention, stopping it after the first time. And I think a lot of people think, because we're never going to stop this completely. This has been going on from the beginning of time. My guess is, especially with phones and social media, it will continue, but we
Mhm.
can do our best to give our kids the tools and the words to not keep it a secret.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's good communication is just key to like everything in life. I really believe. But for the families who are still like, you know what, like you said, your cousin, your brother, I'm not sure, you were saying that, oh, but sleepovers were the best. That I have my best memories with that. So for the parents who are listening and are still like, oh, but I really want them to be able to do a sleepover. What factors should parents take into account when deciding whether to allow their child to do a sleepover or allow any sleepovers at all?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely talking to your kids. Definitely. I actually talk to other families. I have something over Memorial Weekend where I'm going to be, arranging the sleeping arrangements with my kids and their friends in a way where each of the family is going to be together. But I told the parents right off the bat of the friends that are coming, and I said, hey, just so you guys know, I'm crazy around these sleepovers, but I want to be really, really safe. So I would make it very clear to the families that maybe your kids are going to be spending time with, that you're aware of it, that your family talks about it, that you'd like them, in a sleeping arrangement or an arrangement where if they feel uncomfortable, they're able to call you. What's so interesting about having these conversations, like I said in the past, is that yes, you're helping your child stay safe, but you are also letting the perpetrator know that you are talking about it with your kids, that they are aware of it, that they're going to call you if they're uncomfortable. When perpetrators know that, there's no way that they're going to go after your child. Perpetrators find children who are secluded, who like just have a lot of things where they know that they won't talk about it, that it's, the shame and the secrecy is very, very important to them to kind of keep these things going. And so when it's out in the open, and that's when I'm talking to youth groups and church organizations around sleepovers, I'm talking to the kids and the families trying to keep their kids safe as much as I'm talking to the perpetrator who is planning and is potentially going to try something at that sleepover or at that youth overnight or whatever it may be. And when they're on high alert that like, oh, no, we're talking about this. Oh my gosh, this is out in the open. Oh my gosh, we're going to talk about this again. Or this family is very aware of this. It just cuts it dramatically when
Yeah.
they know that it's not secret. The secrecy is just what makes this so much bigger.
It's so true. And I like how you say that. The thing is, I'm thinking I'm going to be having that conversation probably more than likely with the mother. So trying to have that conversation with both parents. And I
Yeah.
think also asking, is there anyone who is going to be in the home that
Yes.
evening? Are you having any guests?
Yes.
Is Big Brother going to be out? Do you have an uncle staying over because they're coming through? Like, just like you said, that dentist, he had his dentist friends come over. Like, who is coming over that night? Is there anyone else? And can you let me know if anyone does stop by that I'm not already aware of? I think that that's also maybe a good question.
You nailed it. Absolutely. It is not always the brother, but the brother's friends. It's
Right.
the baseball team's over and then they bring friends over. And so when you're not aware of that and kids, aren't they shouldn't be focused on this, but you need to be when you're mitigating risk. And so
Yes.
the more potential for more people that are over there, especially people you don't know or that the family doesn't know. Now, I will say that even within families, this can be very sensitive. Families can be offended. Close family members can be offended. I have many friends who will not do sleepovers, and their family is resentful around it, but they stick to what they believe is right, and you just have to do that. Sometimes you're not going to be well liked, or sometimes people are going to say, oh, this is so over the top, or you're a helicopter mom. Well, yeah, in this case, with the numbers the way they are and the percentage of things like this happening, I am in this way. So maybe I'm overprotective, but it's just how I sleep at night and make sure that my kids are as safe as can be. And so
Of
know
course.
that it's not always going to be met with people that are like, oh, thanks so much for watching out. No, there's going to be people that may be offended by this, even close family members who say, you can't have a cousin's sleepover. You can't come over to grandma's. Like, what's wrong with you? That it actually happens more than you think for the person that chooses not to engage in those.
That makes sense. Thank you for that heads up. And you're saying, now that you know the statistics, well, share those with us if you can, Kristen. Like, can you elaborate on any of the statistics that really have impacted your stance on sleepovers?
Yeah, so I know Utah, of course, really well. We're and nationally, we're a little bit higher um, than the national, and maybe you could even think about you and your family and how you maybe compare. And why Utah's a little bit higher is we have large families. We have a lot of youth-led activities. We have a ton of family reunions. We have big families, so we're also very hands off. A lot of us don't lock our doors. We let our kids run around, which is what makes actually the state that I live in so great, right? We have big families, we have a lot of get-togethers, we have a lot of family reunions and youth church activities and overnights and campouts. Like we have all that, which is so great. But it also we're not aware. So we're 1 in 7. This is reported 1 in 7, which is touch with touch, 1 in 5 if it's also including non-touch, which is, the sexting and the phone and stuff. So that's 1 in 5 kids. I have 6 kids. That means, and by the way, we had an incident with my oldest daughter in high school where these I won't say what they're called, but boys that take pictures of their penis and
Mhm.
he held it up and did it in PE, held it up and said, I'm sending this to Audrey Andrus. And I mean, then I go to the anyway, so then I go to the school and like, what is my daughter doesn't know what to do. And you think this is the first
Yeah.
time he's done it? So,
No.
anyways, my point is it's already touched my family, right? It's already and I only have one kid in high school. And so 1 in 5 is kind of the number that I say in Utah because I think some of this technology, you know, sex abuse stuff is pretty legitimate and not good. Nationwide, I think it's with touch reported, which once again, how much goes unreported? So
Oh
much.
my God. I'm sure.
We're looking at like 1 in 10, and then with the technology more like 1 in 7. So it affects a lot of us, and that once again is reported. Most is not reported.
Yeah, because of the shame. You're absolutely right. And are there certain ages or developmental stages when sleepovers may be more or less appropriate for children or no?
I believe that one, and this is just my Kristin Andrus's, testimony of sleepovers, is I believe once they get out of the stage where someone, that power differential is really important, right? So like, a 10-year-old on a 7-year-old or something like that. But once you get to maybe be a teenager and you've talked about this and they're like, I'm not going to let anyone do this, then you get into more of the dating issues. You get into more of the rape and the sexual abuse, which is just different, right? And
Mhm.
then, a lot of the substances. And so to me, even when you maybe feel the power of being able to say no and get yourself out of a situation, there's other situations that present themselves like drinking and drugs and pills and sexting and pornography and all of that stuff, that to me, once again, risk reward, it doesn't, for me, it doesn't offset that, like, okay, they could walk away from something, where now there's a whole different group of problems that could potentially happen. Like, why does my daughter's 16. Why does she need to go sleep over at someone's house at 16? Well, I tell you, it's not to like sit and read a book and go to bed early, right? They're going to potentially get into trouble. They're probably at a house where they have a little bit more leniency. They're going to stay up super late. And I think after midnight, like nothing good happens. And
Right.
that's why they're staying out late is all that stuff that happens. So I was a teenager. I did sleepovers, and I'll just leave it at that. It was not good stuff.
Oh my gosh. See, and I guess I did sleepovers too, but and you're right. I mean, I would go maybe to a party, but after a certain I guess I just wasn't interested in all of that stuff. I was just like, this is like I just didn't like it. It felt yucky. So I don't know. And when when other, of my girlfriends would sleep over, we would just watch movies and eat candy and all of that stuff. Like, you know what
My
I mean?
kids
So
probably would too. Yeah, yeah.
so that's
Well, but
why
there's
it's like
the
hard.
potential. Yeah,
Yeah. Because I
yeah,
think you just need to really know your kid. Like,
yeah.
if you know deep down your kid, like, oh gosh, they're just not interested in that kind of stuff. Even when there's a party or that kind of thing, it's just because that's why my house was always the party house because I was the one cleaning up and helping my friends like get home kind of thing.
Totally,
So
totally.
it's funny. I think you have to really understand also who
Yeah.
your kid is. But these are really great tips for us to learn because already now my son who I talked about before, he's now in kindergarten. He's almost done going into first grade. And he's already asking, can we do a sleepover at Luke's house? And I'm like, Luke seems great, but no. You cannot do that yet. And that's why I was like, is there a right age? So that makes sense.
We do
And question,
layovers.
what is
So
that?
we do lateovers, and they're really big in Utah because we're all starting to kind of catch on that like we maybe shouldn't be doing all these sleepovers. And so they're like, you can stay now. Luke and your son don't want to stay out this late, but like for my kids, it's like, okay, everyone's because that's the thing, is everyone's spending the night. Mom, everyone gets to spend the night. And I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, you get to stay till 1. This is like my 14-year-old or my 16-year-old. So like a dance company, they're all doing a sleepover, like stay out till 2 and drive home at 2, or I'll come pick you up at 2. But like give them that flexibility and fun that they can stay up really late. But then when everyone's kind of going to bed and stuff, they can go home, that they're safe, and then they can come back for breakfast or whatever. But we do lateovers, and that's kind of caught on. That's the other thing is when everybody's doing sleepovers, it's hard to be the one that you're not. But when
Right.
everyone's doing lateovers and it's like, there's no need for a sleepover. Plus, I'm not putting myself in risk having kids come over to my house and then potentially saying something, like you always want to watch out for yourself too. That these lateovers are great. And then you go to bed and wake up a little bit more refreshed than at somebody else's house.
That is a brilliant idea. I love the idea of a lateover. I've never heard of that. And that is definitely something I am taking with me and will be probably using in the future. I love that. I love it. And are there some, I guess, let me see. if parents do decide to let their kids do the sleepover, maybe they're like, Kristin, I am tired. 2 in the morning. I just can't go and drive. But yes, if you're freaking out enough, you'll be up at 2 in the morning anyway, worrying about your kid go drive over there. But if they're like, no, let's just do the sleepover. What important conversations should be had in advance with the parents and with your child? Is there anything specific? I talked about, like, is there anyone else in the home? That sort of thing. Are there any other things that we should be talking about specifically so we can have that on our list?
Yeah, and I would say I wouldn't wait until a sleepover. If you're listening to this
Mm,
podcast tonight at dinner, tomorrow on the drive to school, on the way to work, whatever it is, say, oh my gosh, this is a great opening, right? I just listened to this podcast and I learned about it's something called child sexual abuse, and it's where kids are hurt. You don't even have to use the word abuse. You can say where kids are hurt. And there's something where like there's some people that make really bad choices and they can touch kids in places. Honestly, you kind of have to have that conversation and say, has anyone ever touched you? Like before I got into this work, I talked to a pediatrician and she said, I don't tell my kids to watch out for him. I say, when is the last time that someone touched you there? And I thought, and she's a pediatrician. She sees this all the time. And I thought, "Oh my gosh, can you imagine?" And it's like pornography, like not like if you see pornography, it's like, when's the last time you saw pornography? It's the same thing with this. It's kind of like this happens to a lot of kids. It's really sad, but once we talk about it, we can make sure that we keep you safe. So we're going to keep you as safe as possible. But if something were to happen, we would want you to tell us. And this is what it would look like. It could look like one of your friends touching you on the penis. It could look like a girl who reaches over and like touches your boob and then she does it again. And you're like, this is super uncomfortable. You're actually able to leave that situation. Call me, text me, do we have a word? Go tell the mom that we don't feel well, that you don't feel well. There's a lot of ways to get out of the situation, but you need to know ahead of time. Where if you're uncomfortable, and by the way, maybe it has nothing to do with sexual abuse, maybe it has to do with drugs or alcohol or something that you're just like, I feel really uncomfortable. Anytime you feel uncomfortable, you need to be prepared to be able to leave with a great excuse that you can just get up, call me, and I'll come pick you up anytime, night or day. But that open communication and just saying, by the way, if you know of a situation with a friend or family member, you can say, hey, this happened to someone that we know and love, and they were able to talk to their parents, showing them that we can get past this. But you have to be clear. You have to talk about it. Before I started this with my kids, I sat down and had the worst conversation I've ever had because I had to sit down with each one of the six and say, you guys hear that I'm working on the Safe Child Project. Like, do you know what that is? Some of them did, some of them didn't. And I said, it's when adults or kids touch you in the privates. And I had to look them in the eye and say, has that happened to you? Has anyone touched you down there, up here, or when you felt it? And it was like the worst. Like I wanted to throw up, right? It's the last conversation I ever wanted to have. But before I went on this, statewide initiative, I had to know if it was happening to my kids.
of
And
course.
and so like that's why I admonish you to like have the conversation tonight at dinner. And yes, it is a dinner time conversation. Yes, it's a car ride conversation. Even if your kids are 3, 4, 5. And by the way, it starts around 5 or 6 that this happens. I mean, earlier too, but definitely ages 7 to 13 is the prime age that this begins. So say like I'm learning about this and I had no idea how prevalent it was. And I know that Aunt Susie had an issue growing up and she talked to her mom and they were able to work through it and it didn't happen to her again because she stopped it. And so just having, and then, next month when there is a sleepover or a family thing, it's like, hey, remember when we talked about that? What are you going to do if you feel uncomfortable? So it's an ongoing, it's kind of like the sex conversation. It's an ongoing conversation that your kids are like, I know, mom. But by the way, like you're also keeping them really safe having this awkward conversation because it's a lot more awkward if they're being molested. I'll just say that.
Yeah, yeah, and horrific and terrible and all the things. Oh my gosh. And what guidance would you give, Kristen, to offer parents who may feel that pressure by their child, by other parents, like, "Oh, you're overreacting. Mom, everyone's doing it," to allow sleepovers despite their reservations?
And my kids say that, like, just this week, it's like, everybody's going on this, and I'm like, "I know," and, like, 1 in 5 of them are going to be sexually abused by the time they leave high school. So that's just a choice that their family makes. I know all too well that the chance of something happening to you at the sleepover is, like, 1 in 5 chance. When there's a 20% chance that you're gonna go somewhere and, like, be sexually abused, at least be hit on or preyed upon or something, like, it's just not worth it for me. So when you're 18 and you leave, you get to go do whatever you want. But for right now, it's just something that we as a family have chosen not, dad and I have chosen not to do. And we just think it's best for you. But once you're older and you can make your own choices, that's great. Now there are, like I said, this Memorial weekend, like I had a clear conversation with all the parents. It's all girls coming. And I said, even with girls, this happens. So we are going to sit down and have a super uncomfortable conversation with these girls. But by the way, the chance that something happens is cut in half because I'm talking to them about it,
Mhm.
on our way down to this little weekend. So there are ways around it, of course. And we can't leave our kids naive, but I think if anything, they're set up for more success because they know that when they're in these situations, and not just sleepovers, when they're out late at a party and they're getting uncomfortable because someone's happy, like, they know in their brain who they would tell, how they call, how they get out of it, because you guys have talked about it for so long.
Yeah. Ugh, good tips. Great tips, Kristen. This is so good. A lot for us to think about, especially when we're feeling that pressure. Because I mean, for me, I have a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old. Very easy for me to say no right now, but I know that that's only going to get stronger. And to have these just little tips on how to respond to those things, and also a substitute like lateovers, like those are really, really going to help us get to that 18-year mark, and then they can do whatever they want. I love
Yeah.
that. But
Well,
Kristen, do
there
you have
are sports camps, right? There
yeah.
are things like we have church, we're really involved in our church. We have church overnights. Oh my gosh. I mean, I stood in front of 500 people last night in front of my congregation of all of these youth and adults and leaders that are going on this big camp out. And I'm sending my kids on the camp out, right? Like, it's an overnight and I'm sending them because I believe that the risk is worth the reward. They know about it. We talk about it. So I sat and talked to all of these kids and leaders and talked to them about, this is what it looks like. Just so you know, this is not allowed. We are watching for it. We are aware of it. And so I am so straightforward to this entire group that I feel a lot more comfortable now sending my kids on this overnight because, one, they're prepared. They
Mhm.
know what they're getting into. And they also, I've talked to the leaders and the group. Everyone knows that we have our eyes wide open. We're not letting, this go like it's gone years past, because there's been instances, right? So there are going to be times that it comes up. So that's why when they do go, they do have sleepovers and they end up in great events, right? But they're prepared.
Yes, and preparation is key, and we need to do our part as parents to take care of our kids and take care of the other kids. I love that you're not just saying, like, "Only
Absolutely.
my kids at this event." No, it's all of our children. We need to look out for everyone and never let this happen again. Oh my gosh.
Yep.
So, Kristen, do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to leave our audience with?
I think I would just say, you know your kids the best, right? You understand them, you know how they work, as their parent, to how to keep them safe, and you're gonna screw up, right? We're all gonna make mistakes. If something does happen, it's not because you let something happen or you didn't let something happen. Being as open and vulnerable, and accessible to your kids is really where you win. It's not keeping them out of every unsafe situation, but when they do, because all of our kids will be in somewhat unsafe situations at certain points, that they come home and tell you. And so
Mhm.
if you can be that soft place to fall, that total open, and the more vulnerable you are as a mom, of like, these are some things I went through, these are things that dad went, whatever that we've been through, like, they will come to you. And that is the key, I think, to successful parenting. Like, we're all going to fail every day. But when your kids can come and talk to you and share and be open, that's the opposite. They always say that it's a little bit off, but the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, but it's connection. And that's why I feel like the opposite of problems and issues is connection. And so if you have that connection with your kids, you cannot fail, because you guys will be able to get through anything. So trust your gut, trust your instinct, be unpopular, be the mean mom. You will never regret being the mean mom. No, you can't have the phone until this age. No social media. Like, be the mean mom. Own it. By the way, other parents are just fearful. That's why they're not doing it. They're scared of their kids. We're the adults. They're the kids. We can help them. We need to help them. We're in a day and age. We're making it up, truly. And
Mm,
I'm scared to death. And
I
so
am
if
too.
you're the mean mom without social, without whatever, all day long, I'll be the mean mom. And last thought, my daughter, I send one of my daughters to a therapist, like preemptively, just like getting into high school. And I just wanted her to have a therapist name to be able to go. And she's like, Mom, the therapist said, like, I'm so happy and doing so well because I don't have social media. She's 16, by the way. And she's like, I agree. A 16-year-old who doesn't have social media is like, the therapist says, I'm doing so much better than everyone else. And she goes, I look at my friends, they're like, it's horrible. And I don't
Mm.
want that. And so I'm like, oh my
Your
gosh.
mama heart is so
So,
happy hearing that.
and then the next day she asked for Snapchat, but he does get it. You know, you can be the mean mom and they love you for setting boundaries for them. They don't want
Yeah.
the whole world, right?
Yeah.
So
They hate you in the moment, but they love you down, like really love you deep down. They do.
absolutely.
Oh my gosh. Oh man. Kristin, where can everyone find you and all of this information?
Yes. So my personal Instagram is just Kristin Andrus, Kristin, Andrus, Andrus. And then our Safe Child Project, if you're looking to institute something in your school or your, local community, is thepolicyproject.org. And yeah, it's
That's
important
perfect.
stuff.
I love it. Oh man. Kristin, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your experiences and knowledge on this really scary topic, but important topic that we need to be talking about with us. This is just major for all of us parents, and we're just grateful for it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Of course. And for our listeners out there to learn more about Kristin, as she said, you can find her on Instagram at Kristin Andrus, KristinAndrus. And I believe, Kristin, you also have your own website, KristinAndrus.com. Am I right?
Yeah, I used to do my whole thing used to be food, like a food blogger. And then I switched things around. So yeah, that is my website. I'm not really on there. If you want free workouts, I have a YouTube channel with
Ah,
350 at home, really hard free home workouts. They're so much fun. You can get in really good shape with me.
yeah, I want to look like that. So, yes, let's do it. Let's get on YouTube and find Kristin. So, yes. And our team will be posting today's episode on our Baby Chick Facebook page and Instagram page at the Baby Chick Chat. So, if you have any questions or comments about our discussion, be sure to follow us there and share your thoughts and questions with us in the comments section. And as always, please subscribe to Chick Chat, the Baby Chick podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts, and leave us an honest review. Cheers to informed parenting and advocating for your family.